Good evening and welcome everyone to the second virtual public information meeting of the Northern Tier Passenger Rail Study. My name is Michaela Niles. I am the Mass DOT project manager for this effort, and I'm joined today by members of the consultant team. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our working group members in attendance, including the elected officials on the call today. Before we launch into the presentation, I would like to open with a few procedures for tonight's meeting. Please note that you have been automatically muted upon entering the meeting, and there will be time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to share a comment or question during the Q&A period, there are a few ways to do so. If you'd like to participate verbally, please use the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. You will then be recognized and you will receive a notification on your screen to unmute at that time. Please note that the notification will show up on your primary Zoom screen just in case any other windows may be open, such as the Q&A box. You may also type your comment or question using the Q&A. If you're participating by phone this evening, you may dial *9 and we will call out the last digits of your phone number, then unmute your audio. We'd like to hear from as many folks as we can tonight, so we ask that you please share only one comment or question at a time and limit comments to 2 minutes to allow others to participate. You can view closed captions by clicking the closed captions feature and selecting either show subtitle or view full transcript. Show subtitle will display captions at the bottom of your screen, and view full transcript will display the meeting's audio transcription in a window to the right. And if you have any IT questions throughout the presentation, please contact Zoom technical support at 888-799-9666. Please also note that this meeting is being recorded. The Massachusetts Department of Transportation may choose to retain and distribute the video, still images, audio, and/or chat transcripts. And by continuing attendance with this virtual meeting, you are consenting to participate in a recorded event. All recordings and transcripts will be considered a public record. If you're not comfortable being recorded, please keep your microphone muted and refrain from utilizing the Q&A. And finally, all questions and comments are welcome and appreciated. We do, however, request that folks refrain from any disrespectful comments. So now moving to today's agenda. For tonight's meeting, we will provide an overview of the study process and review the public workshop that was held earlier this year. From there, we will present the Phase 2 alternatives development and evaluation, and then open up the floor for public comment. And then finally, we'll outline the next steps for the study. So as a little bit of background on this study effort, as we go into a little bit of a study overview, the Massachusetts legislature directed Mass DOT to conduct a study of the feasibility of rail access between North Adams and Boston. And in fulfillment of this directive, this conceptual planning study seeks to assess the economic and environmental benefits, as well as any associated implementation challenges, and identify all necessary improvements to support restored passenger rail service along the Northern Tier. And next, as we move to the next slide, we'll talk about a little bit about an overview of the study process itself. And this chart outlines the study tasks, with each step building upon the previous one, with public participation serving as the foundation of the study, which has been carried throughout. And as I mentioned, today we'll be discussing the Phase 2 alternatives development and analysis, and that's tasks 5 and 6. And at the conclusion of these tasks, recommendations will be developed, and all of this information will be documented in a draft report, which will then be released for public comment and then finalized in a final report. So next, moving to just some of the goals and objectives of this study. And these were developed based on the feedback received at the onset of the process. And these goals are to support economic development and along the corridor, to promote transportation equity, and to minimize the impacts of transportation on public health and the environment. And so with that, I will now turn it over to Anna Berry, the project manager for the consultant team. Anna?
Thank you, Michaela. And next, we're going to take a look at a recap of the public workshop that we held in January. As Michaela mentioned, we're doing this in 2 phases. So in January, we talked to you about the initial alternatives we developed in phase one. We took your feedback from that public workshop, as well as other feedback you gave us, to develop the 4 additional alternatives. Now we'll just take a quick look at what those initial alternatives looked like in the next slide. And they're the 2 alternatives we developed are very similar. They involve a one ride from North Adams to Boston North Station, the same stations, North Adams, Greenfield, Fitchburg, and North Station, 5 trains daily at approximately the same times. It assumes that we will not interfere with commuter schedules and freight train operations. We also assumed that we would have the standard Amtrak station timing of 2 minutes, and that we'd operate with conventional Amtrak Amfleet diesel equipment, similar to the Valley Flyer. And we assumed no changes to MBTA-owned infrastructure. The major differences between our 2 alternatives were in the level of investment. So we had one alternative that involved a lower level of investment, minimum signal improvements required for safety, upgrade of one particularly slow track at East Deerfield Yard, and some minor additions to track to support running more trains on a single track railroad so they could meet each other or pass. We made no significant changes in this alternative to the track quality and track speed. In the higher investment alternative, we made much more improvement to the track, increased the improvements to signal systems, and also increased the amount of number of locations where we added double tracking to allow for operation of more trains at higher speeds. We also increased the leveling of the track in order to allow for optimum speed increases throughout the section of railroad in the freight territory. In the next slide, we talk about we're now going to talk a little bit about how we evaluated those 2 alternatives. And in some respects, they were still similar. Same coverage area because we had the same stations. We projected minimal environmental impact because we're using existing railroad rights of way. Little or no impact on MBTA operations, and minimal impact on freight operations. Where did the significant differences lie? The first one we look at is in travel times. The travel time for the lower investment service was about 4 hours in each direction. That in the higher investment scenario, it's about 3 hours. And in fact, going eastbound toward Boston, it's about 2 hours and 3/4, 2 hours and 48 minutes. So that's the significant difference, which also has, you'll see going in the next few minutes, has a significant impact on other ways of looking at these 2 alternatives. The other significant difference is the cost. The cost of these, of the higher investment scenario, by definition, is much higher than the lower one, which gives you a significant increase in the number of jobs and other positive economic impacts arising from the project, much higher for the higher investment scenario. When we look at cost effectiveness, we look at measures of such as capital cost per mile. Because we spend less in the lower investment scenario, that's a lower cost per mile. It's almost half of what it is for the higher investment level. If another way of looking at cost effectiveness is the capital cost per rider. And again, with the lower investment scenario, it's a lower capital cost per rider because of the significant difference in that investment level. But when we look at the annual operating cost per rider, which is another way of measuring effectiveness, what's the cost of operating and maintaining those trains over the life of over each year of the railroad's operation? It's much lower for the higher investment level, and the reason for that is that it attracts that many more riders that the similar annual operating cost is distributed across more riders and becomes has a much lower operating cost per commuter or customer. The other difference we look at is the annual VMT reduction, which stands in for environmental improvement. It's the reduction in vehicle miles traveled and they're relating to auto emissions and pollution is much more effective and much higher for the higher investment scenario. And here again, we see the impact of having a higher ridership alternative, where that many more people are projected to leave the automobile and to take the train and to reduce the vehicle miles traveled and related environmental impacts. We listened to your feedback, and that the feedback included consider additional stops. You wanted us to evaluate a connection to Albany, New York. You also wanted us to consider seasonal attractors out in Western Massachusetts. And you wanted us to consider potential upgrades to support higher speeds. In addition, you had some questions for us. In the next slide, you'll see you had some questions about our ridership projections and comments about our cost estimation. And now I'm going to ask my colleague, Paul Nelson, to talk more about that.
Thanks, Anna. So what I want to do just briefly here is cover how we initially estimated the ridership, and then how during the first phase of the alternatives development and screening, and then how that changed since you last saw us speak with you in January. So the first thing I'm going to review is the ridership. Second is going to be cost estimation. So our initial ridership estimation was a 3-step process. Just to kind of lay the base, we need to understand how many trips are being made in the corridor to start with. And so we made a presentation on this at the public workshop, but the underlying data is a series of location-based data that's supplied by cell phone aggregators. So that gives us some sense of the trips that go between different communities and things like that. And that's a common transportation data tool that's used. So what we did is we worked with our team to compare that to MBTA boardings within the commuter rail system, because the whole point of this is to try and predict how much of the actual trip activity translates into trained ridership. And so we have this existing data set of MBTA commuter rail stops and stations and the trains that serve them. So that was the first one, just trying to understand how those two relate to each other. Next, we looked at how travel time tends to impact ridership on a similar intercity service. So there is a difference in attraction between intercity service like the Downeaster and other Amtrak services and the commuter rail. The commuter rail's higher frequency, and there's other aspects like that. And that gave us some way to calculate for each additional minute of travel time, you're seeing a reduction in potential boardings by a certain percent. And travel time really does play the strongest role in predicting ridership and in realizing ridership. So then taking those two factors, we looked at how that compares to the longer trips on the Downeaster in our third step, and translated that into the potential ridership from the stations in Fitchburg, North Adams, and Greenfield that were included in the first two alternatives. So now I'm going to, on the next slide, I'll review, we made some updates to that process. So we've now made it 4 steps. Not that we added a step, but it's also a slightly different process. Step 1 is pretty much the same. We took a look at how location-based service data translates to commuter rail passengers trips. But one of the things that we changed is instead of looking at absolute travel time, we used a comparison of the train or transit travel time to the auto travel time between the same destinations, because it's really, we wanted to make sure we were reflecting that there really is those are the two major choices in the corridor for making these trips. So that's one thing that we changed. And then similarly to the first step, we looked at, in a little bit of a different way, we adjusted the commuter rail estimation model to reflect the less frequent service that would be provided by any intercity service. So again, each additional trip increases boardings by X. So you're taking MBTA commuter rail trains, which have 20, 30 trips per day, and decreasing it to the 5 round trips that we have in our alternatives. And then step 3 was bringing those together, looking at the estimated corridor boardings by market and number of trains, and then applying that comparison between rail travel time and auto travel time to adjust the boardings. And then what we did there, second in our 4th step, was to look at the Downeaster to estimate how many trips would occur within the corridor, because the model really probably underestimated trips within the corridor. This was mostly looking in the first 3 steps, looking at trips from the stations into Boston, since it's the dominant attractor of trips. So we took the Downeaster service and compared how many intra-corridor trips they have and used that as a proxy for what we would expect in the northern tier corridor. Next slide, please. And just to reorient you to some of the information that we looked at as far as trips in the corridor, this is a slide from, I believe, our first public information meeting where we talked about how we looked at these location-based service trips and how that translated to the corridor. So if you recall, we had split the corridor into a west, central, and eastern segment. And just, you can see that the amount of trip activity in the corridor really mirrors the population density. In the eastern section, you have more of the people, so you have more of the trips just in general. But this is just an idea of how that plays out. And you can see that we've broken it out that there's a mix of work trips and non-work trips. And you can notice that the non-work trips constitute the majority of travel trips in the corridor. Next slide, please. So the other question we had was, for these ridership figures, how does that translate into a geographic catchment area? What kind of communities are we factoring in to attract these riders to each station? And so shown on the map here is a pullout from our catchment model, or our estimation model, showing the different catchment areas. And on the left, what you can see is, first of all, I'll just talk about the overall territory. You can see that we have the entire state of Massachusetts, and that we also have some of the adjacent communities in New York, Vermont, and New Hampshire. And you can see how, on the left, how those catchment areas form around the initial stations that we looked at, North Adams, Greenfield, Fitchburg, and then kind of an agglomeration for Boston. And you can see that the decision on which station each person from each community would go was based on the shortest distance. And you can see how that then translates to the alternative in our second phase that had the most stops, how those catchment areas change and become slightly smaller when you have stops in North Adams, Shelburne Falls, Greenfield, Athol, Gardner, and Fitchburg. So that's just there were questions about that, so we wanted to supply some information on what those catchment areas look like. Next slide, please. And so that kind of concludes how it changed. You'll see the results after we review the additional 4 alternatives that we developed and how they compare. And then the other big ticket item that we wanted to review was how cost estimation for these comes together. And just to refresh everyone on the definition of or the components and what a cost estimation is, it's the process of forecasting the cost of building an infrastructure project, and it considers factors such as materials, the geographic location, the equipment needed, and the amount of labor needed. And different forecasts there's basically a different process depending on the level of design. The more you know about the site, the more you know about what you're proposing to do in really fine detail, the more accurate you can be in your estimate. So normally, since we're at a pre-design stage, there's a number of contingency costs that are incorporated because we don't have detailed survey. We don't know exactly, how the tracks would move when they're upgraded or if there's a double track added, and things like that. But there are kind of common industry standards for how you estimate the unknown but expected elements of the project. And once again, just to reiterate, those impact, the material, the equipment, and the labor costs, and that they're all based on recent railroad construction projects in Massachusetts and surrounding states. So it's considered comparable for a comparison's sake. Next, please. And here's kind of a diagram kind of showing how all of those fit together. So you have cost categories tied to construction, tied to right-of-way acquisition, which was actually pretty minimal in all of these alternatives, because we found in looking at the first 2 alternatives that we could get competitive travel times within the travel times in the corridor competitive to auto travel without any major new alignments of the rail. It was really just upgrading the speed of the existing track. But there is, right-of-way issues related to any layover facilities and things like that. So those costs were incorporated. Then you also have a civil system contingency. This is drainage and all the other elements of earth moving that go into it to make the land basically ready for that construction. Then you also have vehicle costs. For this, we assume that equipment was purchased by MassDOT to run the service. And then you have escalation for future costs. That's really just the effect of inflation, which factors into costs for construction, just like everything else. And then you have the costs tied to engineering and permitting to do that work, to do the final design, the preliminary design, get the proper permits to have the construction happen. So those all factor into the costs that we put together here, and you'll see in the presentation. Next slide, please. So, you know, the kind of slight changes that were involved between the first round of alternatives and here, we took a look at the costs of track components. The major upgrades in most of these alternatives are reconstructing or rehabilitating the rail bed and the rails so that you allow tracks that currently are only good for slower speeds, say like 10 miles an hour for freight trains, up to speeds of, say, 60 miles an hour. So that means looking at what's really necessary as far as ballast replacement, looking at new rails and refinishing the rails, things like that. We also added a credit to the cost estimates because it's very common in railroad industry to recycle the rail that you're taking out. So there is a credit for that. And then rolling stock estimates were updated with new assumptions on the cost of the consists, which is the engine and the cars. And that's basically, there were some more recent rolling stock purchases we could use as comparables, which actually decreased decreased our estimated cost. And then we took a more detailed look at the station cost estimates and made sure that they reflect the accessibility improvements that would be needed when you're building a new railroad train station. You do need to incorporate the ability to access it. So ramps and stairways and things like that. Next slide, please. And I think I turn it back over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Paul. So we took your feedback and went into the process of developing the phase 2 alternatives and evaluating those. We can go to the next slide. So the next 4 alternatives we developed were for electrified service, a full local service with additional station stops, an extension to Albany, New York, and what we call the Northern Tier Rail Link, which is running the Northern Tier trains to Fitchburg, with the customers changing there for the service into Boston on the MBTA commuter rail. So we'll take a look at what these look like and what some of the costs and other factors are, starting with alternative 3 in the next slide. So you see, it's all the same right of way, but we have, I will say that for each of these alternatives, we assume the higher investment level of the initial alternatives that we showed you. So we're assuming levels of double tracking and speed improvements already incorporated into alternative 2. And some of the locations of double tracking may be a little different, and some of the lengths may be a little different based on the numbers of trains and where they stop, but it's essentially the same level of investment with other factors added in or deducted depending on what we're looking at. So in this case here, we've added the cost of electrification, which is substantial and gives us the highest priced alternative of any of those. But you see below the cost of track work, it's almost $900 million, substantial, as Paul mentioned. There are many bridges that we would have to look at. Significant improvements in signals and grade crossings, station construction, and all of these alternatives except one include a layover facility in the North Adams area, and the cost of rolling stock, which is rolling stock that can operate under a catenary system, electrified catenary system. And as the rest of the characteristics, some of them are quite similar. We've got 5 trains a day. That makes every train makes all stops. The stations in this alternative are North Adams, Greenfield, Athol, Fitchburg, Air, Porter Square, and North Station. By fairly unanimous request at the workshop in January, we've added Porter Square to every alternative. And now we show you the proposed alternative, various locations of double track grade crossings that we just talked about, and looking at the cost. So moving on to alternative 4. Alternative 4 we're calling full local service. We have stations including the North Adams, Greenfield, Fitchburg, and North Station. We have Shelburne Falls, Athol, Gardner. And again, we've added Porter Square to all alternatives. So this means we have a higher level of cost for stations, but this alternative, as with the following ones, won't have any electrification component. So the cost goes down almost by half because of the high cost of electrification. But track work, bridges, signals, layover cost, and equipment remain largely the same. So we have and again, I mentioned the double tracking might be in a different location based on station locations and where the trains will need to pass. But the investment level is largely the same as higher investment level. Next, alternative 5 is the extension to Albany, which also includes station stop in Schenectady, New York. We do have to support some improvements to track in New York in order to support additional trains that don't currently operate there now. So we would be adding double track in Stillwater and Clifton Park. We again have done most of the similar type of work to the higher investment level in Massachusetts. And because we have assumed the use of yard space in Albany, we're not including a layover location in North Adams. So when you look at the cost levels down below, we have a similar cost, except we have more track work because we're doing more track. There's a few more grade crossings in New York, and we have a little more station work, but not including stations in New York because they already exist. No layover and similar rolling stock requirements for just under $200 million. Finally, we look at alternative 6, which assumes the high investment levels and the station stops at North Adams, Greenfield, Athol, and Fitchburg. And at Fitchburg, customers would alight from the Northern Tier trains and wait and take the MBTA commuter rail the rest of their trip into Boston and reverse on the return trip. So as we look at the elements of improvements, are very similar, improving the track class, which is speeds. We do rehabilitate a siding in Fitchburg that we need to use while we're waiting for customers to get off the Fitchburg trains and go west. But the rest of the upgrades are very similar. So we have a comparable cost for track work and bridges and grade crossings and signals. We go back to having a layover in North Adams. We have additional stations for station improvements and the similar cost for rolling stock for just over $1.5 million for this alternative. Next, we just wanted to give you a little bit of a context for some of the costs that we've shown you. These are the costs per mile for each of our alternatives. And because again, the electrification component is the highest one that has the highest cost per mile. The others are relatively in a similar range, except the one of the Albany extension is smaller because it's a similar cost or not so much a greater cost over a higher number of miles, 223 miles versus the 140 to North Adams. We also show you a couple of comparators of recent rail projects in New England and the cost per mile for those. Hartford Line is about a 65-mile project between New Haven and Springfield, which is about $19 million per route mile. And South Coast Rail in southeastern Massachusetts is a commuter rail project that's coming out at about $13 million per route mile. So I think you can see that the Northern Tier per mile costs are in a similar ballpark, and hopefully that provides you some context for those costs. Next. We have a little bit of an eye chart here, but we wanted to just lay out all of the alternatives and their features, including their travel times. And so what we have is you see the initial 2 alternatives and the trip times they provide. When we look to and the stations, we've talked about all these stations. I think you can see what they are. Now we get down to the trip times. Alternative 3, the electrified alternative, is about 2 hours and 50 minutes, very similar to the alternative 2. Full local service is a little higher than that, 2 hours and 59 minutes, a few more station stops. The extension to Albany, we're measuring here between North Adams and Boston, not the trip to Albany for comparison. And that is very similar to the initial alternative 2 at 2 hours and 49 minutes. And the trip time for the Northern Tier rail link at getting off and changing trains at Fitchburg is the highest at 3 hours and 22 minutes from North Adams to Boston. We create the maximum speeds on these lines. The railroad throughout is about the same, although not distributed in the same manner. But as you know, alternative 2 through alternative 6 has similar levels of improvements and more sustained amounts of higher speed track. Again, we're suggesting minimal environmental impacts because we're using existing right-of-way, and the main environmental impact would come from the location of a North Adams layover yard. We're again still saying very few impacts on passenger rail because we've designed the schedules around the MBTA's very regular commuter rail service. We've also designed the schedule to minimize minimize impacts on the freight service that's being operated currently as we know it. We have not been able to estimate delays on freight west of North Adams for the Albany extension. That would be something we're still trying to get a handle on if we can. And as we look at grade crossings, which are a safety impact for a community, they're all 69 grade crossings across the Northern Tier, except the Albany extension has a significant number of grade crossings over and above the Massachusetts territory. So this gives you the array of characteristics of the 6 alternatives. Apologizing for all this data on one sheet, but there it is. Now, and I think I'm going to hand the next one over to my colleague, Paul.
Thanks, Anna. So we used the first one to make you ready for this eye chart as well. So we did want to just make sure we had a chance to talk through the differences between all 6 alternatives. So this one is all about the numbers, as you can tell. So I wanted to start with probably what's on the top of most people's mind is the estimated annual ridership. And the way we're showing it for each of the alternatives is a range, just to reflect the fact that, before a service is introduced and, the model's further refined, there is a range of possible ridership. So what you can see here is that, and if you recall back from when I was presenting earlier, travel time plays a big part in attracting ridership. But we also found that the number of stations also plays a big factor in growing ridership. As you add stations, we saw that you're seeing ridership grow as well. So you're not taking the same rider and just having them relocate from one station to another. You're seeing benefits by gathering ridership as well. So what you can see here is, I'll just talk about the high numbers just to show the comparison, but you can see that the 2 kind of biggest outliers ridership wise really tend to be the lower investment alternative 1 and the Northern Tier rail link alternative 6. As we kind of covered, the slower travel time, the extra hour of travel, say between North Adams and Boston, is a major factor in the ridership there. And alternative 6 actually has a built-in delay to it, right? The idea here that you would be taking the train to Fitchburg, and for those folks that are headed on to Boston, which is many of the travelers, you'd have to wait for the train to pull, the Northern Tier service to pull back from the platform, wait for the next scheduled MBTA service, which could be, 15 minutes. Generally that's probably a good scheduling buffer so that you don't miss the train. And then you actually have a longer trip into Boston. So all of those kind of compound on each other to really hurt ridership in that one as well. And then you can see that on the high end, you have alternative 3, the electrified service. You've got, fast responsive service. And then you've got alternative 4, the full local service, also is kind of above the others and that's because of the added stations and the still competitive overall travel times. And you can see 2 and 5 feel the same. And I guess the big revelation from this is you're not really picking up a lot of ridership in Albany. You can see that it's really comparable to the higher investment. And other than the service to Albany, those two alternatives are very similar. Then to get into the numbers, and Anna kind of talked about capital cost per mile, but you can see the comparison, same numbers, same kind of concepts at play. Capital cost per rider, again, there is that kind of give and take between ridership and cost. So you can see that, some of the alternatives that cost more still have some of the most competitive cost per rider figures because of the amount of riders they attract. And then same with operating and maintenance per rider. You do actually with the electrified service have higher operating and maintenance costs, but again, you have more riders. So the per capita is better. And then as far as some of the quantification of benefits, right now, based on, this first one is the riders, the second two are kind of the cost-effective metrics. Now we're talking about, what are the other benefits? So transportation cost savings, again, that's all from the fact that people who aren't driving cars don't have wear and tear in their cars and things like that, don't have to pay to park in Boston if that's their destination. And so you can see there is a way to monetize that. And again, based on ridership, you can see it really follows the same trend with the highest amount of transportation cost benefits for alternative 3 and lowest being alternative 6. Same thing with VMT reductions. It's really kind of another way of looking at the same riders, these same riders that are attracted. Where were they going and how many miles traveled were they? How many miles were they traveling? So you can see that here as well. So same relationship. And then just wanted to get to economic impacts from construction, and I think that actually does speak to one of the questions here about duration of construction. So what we did assume for all of these alternatives 2 through 6, since they do involve many of the same limits of work, right? You're doing work basically from the eastern end of the Hoosick Tunnel all the way to the MBTA territory. So we assume that all of those projects would take about 4 years. And then alternative 1 is assumed to be 3 years because you have fewer spots of construction. And again, a similar relationship as far as economic impacts from construction, primarily because economic impacts from construction are based on overall estimated cost. So you're seeing, more economic benefit from the construction cost itself in alternative 3 because it's a more expensive project, and same relationship down, similar to the number of jobs. You've got many more jobs created with the electrified service. There's more trades involved and different components to it and all of that. So, and just to note that this is the number that includes direct, indirect, and induced. And so for the economists, the non-economists out there, I hope I get this right. The idea here is that direct jobs are the people actually working on the construction project. Indirect jobs are basically people who are supplying that construction, the milling the wood that's used for construction, if that happens. And then the induced is with that added spending in the economy, you're going to see more people working at coffee shops or renting out hotel rooms and things like that. So that gives you just kind of an overview and comparison of the 6 different alternatives on a lot of different metrics. And I wanted to move on to the next slide. So kind of now we've looked at how all 6 alternatives compare to each other. And we wanted to just kind of pull out a little bit and make sure we were talking about shared with you a little bit about how other intercity passenger train services operate. And so here we're comparing the northern tier against 4 other services. One of the first one is the Père Marquette, and that is a train line passenger service that connects Chicago, Illinois with Grand Rapids, Michigan, going across the bottom of Lake Michigan, basically. And then you've got the Piedmont service that runs between Charlotte and Raleigh, North Carolina. We've got the Downeaster, which we referenced in the ridership estimation discussion as well, but that runs from Brunswick, Maine to Boston, Massachusetts. And then we have the Vermonter, which is a slightly different service in that it runs kind of on its own from St. Albans, Vermont down to New Haven, Connecticut, and then joins the Northeast Corridor to provide service to New York City, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. You can see how the frequencies of these services compare to what we've modeled and predicted for the Northern Tier. So most of them run fewer times per day, except for the Downeaster. And then you can see that they have generally comparable distances. The major outlier there is the Vermonter with the 308 miles to New Haven and then 605 miles total. And then just to kind of gauge population, the kind of 25-mile service area for Northern Tier is 6.7 million, and you can see how that compares with the other ones. Pretty comparable to the Pere Marquette, and a little bit higher than the Piedmont and Downeaster. And then the Vermonter, here you're seeing the effect of looking at the whole service. So that's incorporating the larger cities of the Northeast Corridor as well. But then finally, just to get an idea of annual ridership. So and what we're showing for the Northern Tier here is kind of the low and the high. So alternative 6, which was the lowest, maxes out at 23,900 per year. But you have also the electrified service maxing out at 304,000. And so you can see that is kind of in line, maybe with, you can see the Piedmont and the Downeaster tend to have the higher ridership annually than the other two, but we're kind of in the same ballpark generally. So just wanted to provide that as a context to other passenger rail services. We can move on to the next slide. Great. And then, so phase 2 takeaways, we've seen all this information. How do you boil that down to, something to think about? And the way we're thinking about it is that, all the alternatives are thinking back to the goals and objectives, right? All the alternatives can provide added connectivity, mobility, and transportation choice in the corridor. All the alternatives are estimated to provide positive environmental and economic benefits. You're seeing reductions in vehicle miles traveled. You're seeing construction period impacts that all benefit each alternative. But what you really see is that alternative 3, the electrified service, and alternative 4, which is the full local service, generating the highest ridership levels. And that just results in so many other metrics also favoring those two, right? You've got transportation cost savings and VMT reduction. So that's kind of the takeaways that we have from this full evaluation of the 6 alternatives. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Michaela to wrap things up.
Thanks, Paul. Much appreciated. So yes, right now we'd like to open up the floor for public comment. And so on this next slide, in addition to some kind of general comments and questions, we have a few prompt questions as well. So in addition to any general comments or questions about the alternatives evaluation, we'd also like to get your input on what next steps you might recommend. Does one of the alternatives best address the study's goals and objectives? And are there additional items that could be further examined? So as we move to the next slide, where we talk a little bit about how to participate, and many of you already, I see hands raised and comments and questions in the Q&A. But yes, as a reminder, if you'd like to submit a comment or question in writing, please continue to use the Q&A. Or if you'd like to share a comment or question verbally, please use the raise hand button or dial *9 if you're participating by phone. We ask that you please share only one comment or question at a time and limit comments to 2 minutes to allow others to participate. We'd like to hear from as many people as we can ahead of the meeting's end at 7:30. And as a reminder, this certainly is not the only opportunity to comment. Questions and comments can also be shared throughout the study process using the comment form on the study website. And so with that, I would first like to begin with comments or questions from any elected officials or members of their staff in attendance. Please raise your virtual hand and we can unmute you. I see Representative Blay. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Michaela, I thank you. State Representative Natalie Blay from the 1st Franklin District. I just wanted to extend my thanks to you and your team for this comprehensive presentation tonight that incorporated so many of the questions and suggestions that we've heard throughout this process. I have to say, I am, as we said during the working group meeting, I am really impressed and excited about the ridership numbers, the ride time that we're seeing, and certainly the cost. And I'm grateful to you for incorporating so many of the suggestions that not only we as legislators have asked for along the way, but our constituents have. As you could tell, there's a great deal of excitement for rail here in Western Massachusetts. And certainly, as you can tell, my dogs are also very excited about this. But there's a great deal of excitement here in Western Massachusetts for rail, and this information is certainly helpful in terms of us determining next steps.
Thank you so much, Representative. We appreciate you being here today. I next see a raised hand from Senator Comerford. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
I echo what Representative Blais said. This is Joe Comerford. I represent the Hampshire Franklin Worcester District. Michaela, Anna, Paul, thank you. This has been a long process, but tonight I believe it is really demonstrating that it was worth the wait. Especially two of these scenarios are quite extraordinary for the northern tier. Northern Berkshire, northern Franklin County, and northern Worcester County. I wondered if you could, this is a plug for outlining for the participants the next steps in the process, so that everybody who's on the call can understand how they can be most engaged as we go into this this sort of bring it on home part of the study that we're thinking about. And then I wonder if you could just tell us how many people are on the call or registered for the call tonight. I think it'll help us get excited because we've heard from numbers of people, Rep. Blais, myself, Linda Dunleavy from FERCOG, who are very excited to be on the call.
Great. Thank you so much, Senator. Yes, there are 143 people in attendance right now. So thank you all again for taking time out of your evening to join us and share your comments and questions and thoughts with us. We appreciate it. In terms of next steps, as a little bit of a preview for the rest of tonight's presentation, as part of our next steps, based on kind of the comments and questions that we've received tonight, and based on our discussions with the working group last week, we will refine the alternatives based on that feedback, and then move to developing recommended next steps for the study process. So thank you again for sharing your comments with us. Are there any additional elected officials or members of their staff on the call that would like to share any comments or questions? Please use the raise hand button to be recognized. I see Andy Hoagland from Williamstown.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so much for the time. No, I'm impressed with the work and really glad it's gotten this far. I'm also particularly grateful you did the eye chart on the alternatives analysis. Having all that data in one place was helpful. Thanks for that. My request really is to add one more line or two about economic development, not just during the construction job period, but long term. It's going to be analysis, which I assume you're undertaking at some point to understand who may change their location of their businesses, what may happen to housing prices, that type of thing. But I think it would be helpful to all of us to see how each of these 6 alternatives has the long-term economic benefits as well. So again, I appreciate the time and thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate your participation as part of this effort. I next see a raised hand from Representative Barrett. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
I thank you. First of all, I'd like to echo the comments of my 2 colleagues, Senator Comerford and Representative Blais. When we started on this journey almost 2 years ago, we'll say 20 months, somewhere in that neighborhood, I was skeptical of what would come out of this. I am I'm most pleased by what I see. I think it's doable. I think it can happen. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us who believe in this project that we now start to get our campaign alive and going here so that we can move forward. And you say, what is the next step? And as far as I'm concerned, the next step is to get this going, get it built, and get it in operation. I like the time frame and the possibility of how quick it can be done. This is a very thorough study that's been done here, looking at many of the alternatives. I'm not really thrilled about going to Albany. If Albany wants to come to us, we'll gladly welcome them, along with the state of New York. But I do believe that the time has come now is that we have to get an implementation program going and convince the powers to be that this is essential and critical to the areas along the northern tier of Massachusetts for many reasons. I believe it's our future. I think it ranks right up there with broadband, and certainly it is not a cost estimate that is not doable in the state of Massachusetts. And we have to start looking this as a key infrastructure component. So good job, Anna. Good job, Paul. And I think that now we can build upon this foundation that's been established.
Thank you so much, Representative. We appreciate that. I would now like to open up the floor to members of the public in attendance. Please raise your virtual hand by using the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen to share comments and questions. And please continue to use the Q&A to submit any written comments or questions as well. I see a few right now. The first is from Clint, who asks, what is super elevation?
Well, I think the most elegant definition could come from my colleague, Andreas. Andreas?
Sure. So super elevation is when you, when you're going around curves, you have sort of a force that pushes you to the outside. And if you raise the outside tracker, and when you're driving a car, you see it on roadways as well, you raise it to counteract that force. And by doing that, you can operate a little bit more quickly through curve than you were if you just had the track or the roadway flat. And it's mostly a comfort aspect, a comfort feature. It's actually not from a sort of from an operational standpoint. It's not very critical, but from the standpoint of comfort, having that raised, having the outside of a curve raised a bit makes it a lot more comfortable when you're going through it at higher speeds.
And this is a pretty curvy railroad.
It is, and given that it's been exclusively freight for the last 50, 60 years, they redid the track at one point or another, probably the 1960s. To operate at very modest speed. So currently they don't operate more faster than about 30 or 40 miles an hour west of Fitchburg.
We hope that helps.
Thank you, and thank you for that question. I next see a raised hand from Rebecca. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
I do, and thank you very much. I'm Rebecca Bielecki. I'm on the Board of Selectmen for the town of Athol. I'm sorry I had to join late because of another town meeting happening tonight, but I just want to weigh in and clarify that Athol is still in the mix as a possibility as this railway runs through. We've had a lot of economic development that has built up over time. We're one of the few communities that had population growth in the last 2 years. Would like to continue that. We have some new housing development coming, and the railway would be an important asset to help continue that positive momentum.
Well, Athol is in at least a couple of the alternatives, so we listened.
Most definitely. Thank you. And thank you for highlighting that connection between economic development and transportation and housing, because that also relates to a question that we have in the Q&A from Mike, who says, the population growth if population growth is projected in Greenfield from this, will there be policy to encourage dense, affordable housing, to encourage walking, and to discourage sprawl or building where woodland exists now? Failing that, will there be planning to prevent spikes in rents? So thank you, Mike, for raising that connection between transportation and housing, and those all certainly work together in tandem. And as any actions move forward, there will certainly need to be coordination with municipalities about those different elements that connect to transportation, including housing. So thank you for raising that. I next see a raised hand from Andrew. Andrew, you should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Yes, hello folks. I am just psyched out of my mind about this. As I put in the chat there, I'm from North Adams. I live in North Adams, and I just see this as exactly the kind of opportunity we need to get ourselves plugged into the rest of the state and really shine and flourish and be successful again. My question, I guess, is kind of along the lines of what is the next steps, but it's more specifically focused on what can specific residents do to help evangelize this project, to help make sure that this continues, and to make sure that it does get implemented. You know, I was really pleased to hear our representative, John Barrett, speak up in favor of this, but who else can we talk to? What else can we do to be supportive of this?
So thank you, Andrew. I appreciate you being here and for sharing that very important question. This is a great opportunity for that. Everyone showing up, being in attendance here today, all of the comments and questions that we received throughout the process has really helped to shape it, and continuing that after the study is over as well will continue to kind of continue that momentum. So we appreciate all of the comments and questions and your participation, and everyone between from the very first meetings that we had to today and beyond. So we appreciate all of that participation. Please continue to reach out to us, your elected officials, to share your thoughts on this. So we appreciate that. I next see a raised hand from Sean. Sean, you should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Hello, everybody. I'm the town manager in Athol, Sean Suhosky, and I just heard from my very esteemed select board member, Rebecca, a few people before me. What I want to offer is that the alternatives that include Athol, which is the hub of the North County, the North Quabbin region of the Commonwealth, it is also the second most populous stop. If you look between Gardner and Greenfield, 12,000 residents, similar to North Adams. It's vital that that stretch of Route 2 communities have access to the rails for economic development purposes, whether it's commuting and or to increase job opportunities, and just for access, for quality of life. That's something we're starved for. And I'm really excited about this study, and I thank everybody who's making it happen. And let's get it to an implementation phase. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your comments and questions. We appreciate that. And for your taking the time out to be with us tonight, and to all of you for taking the time to be with us tonight. I next see a question in the Q&A from Glenn. There are two questions. And Glenn asks, have land acquisition for additional parking in Gardner, Athol, Greenfield, North Adams, etc., and or the costs related to constructing additional parking lots or parking garages been included in any of the cost estimates? And have these sites been identified in the analysis, or will they be identified by the time the final plan is completed?
We have generally identified potential locations for parking around most of the stations. However, we have not specifically included parking lots or garages in the cost estimates at this time. I think we're going to have to think about whether that's feasible within the what our charge in this study. It might be possibly something done in the future. We've focused on the actual station construction costs.
Thank you. And thank you for the questions. I next see a raised hand from Janice. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Yes, hi. I would love to influence my neighbors in Shelburne Falls and Buckland to learn more about this and to help possibly influence the decision to have the local option. And I feel like it would be helpful to know what the cost of a ticket would be. So that's my question.
So we have not gone into fare policy or cost of tickets. At this stage of a planning study, we're looking at the actual cost of the project itself. Generally, fare policy and the cost of fares is a policy question that is developed further on in the development of a transportation service. We could probably find analogies in some of these other services, but that's not something that we have focused on here.
Thank you, and thank you for that question. I next see a raised hand from John Garrett. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Hello, this is John Garrett. I'm in Greenfield, Massachusetts. And I just wanted to, so thank you all for all the work you're doing on this study. And I kind of want to just echo what a lot of folks have said, and that we should kind of build this yesterday. One of the things, the alternatives I'm particularly interested in is alternative 3, which is the electric service, although I know it is the most expensive. Local service obviously should also be the thing, like the guys from Athol and everybody else, should need a stop as well. But one of the issues, electric service is what used to be on this line back in the day, like the Hoosick Tunnel had wires running over the top of it. And the cost of it is, is such that it really doesn't feel like it's a feasible opportunity. And that worries me, because part of the purpose of this, in addition to economic development and individuals' lives, is to decarbonize our environment, our transportation system, or at least lower the carbon emissions. And so if we're not able to keep the cost of electrification in control, we're really in a lot of trouble, meeting our 2050 climate goals and all that stuff. So one of the things, just to get to the point, is the estimate you guys have is $1.3 billion, which I calculated out, assuming it's like 90 miles from North Adams to Fitchburg, and I don't know if that's exactly right. It's about 14 million per mile for electrification. But I've also, was trying to Google, like, is this crazy expensive? And I found a Transit Matters study, which is this group that looks at the MBTA, I guess. And they said for the whole MBTA system, they thought it could be $1.5 billion. And they had this table of construction projects I'm looking at. In like Israel, for example, they're doing it for $2.2 million per square mile. Or I'm sorry, for a track mile. And, New Zealand is 2.2 million. You've got Toronto at 7 million per mile. They have San Francisco as having a similar $14 million per mile cost, but they also claim that's like result of basically poor contracting and special kind of procurement processes. So in short, how come the cost of that is so different compared to this report? And I don't think this is a question you guys can answer like right this second, but I would love to see like a real deep dive into why are these other countries able to do this for so much cheaper than this estimate, instead of comparing to other places in New England or, New York or whatever that are doing it for much more expensive. Because it worries me that a project like this won't be built basically because it's going to be seen as like a crazy expense in the way that it should, which is the greenest way possible, So I know that's a lot of, different kind of situations to compare, but I think it's really important to figure out, like, do we hire a bunch of people from New Zealand and basically pay them, $4 million to do this, and then we'll save money. Like, what can we do? So that's my question in long. So I'll call it quits. Thanks.
Well, I think we can say that, yes, we know that when you look around the world and maybe even other parts of the country where some of these projects can be done more cost effectively than this looks like. We used our experts in this type of work who drew upon their experience, but that doesn't mean as the project gets further refined, as Paul mentioned, there's a lot of built in because of unknowns. It doesn't mean prices and examples can't be refined to make it more palatable. But where we're starting out is the best information that we have from our folks that do this work.
And
Thank
and I would, sorry, Michaela, I just wanted to add that I think this is a question that happens a lot with rail and transit projects in general. In fact, I even believe there's a center at NYU or or Columbia that has a whole report on why it's cheaper to do transit in other countries than the United States. So I think, just another thing I want to note is that, we kind of have to follow the standard of the practice for these things. If we were living in a dramatically different future where we had the MBTA system electrified, right? So you had more comps, you had more experience doing this, that could change how prices, for this are, but we can't kind of speculate that. And I think that trying to compare all of the factors to a different country where they have different standards for substation construction, because remember, it's not just the overhead wires, it's also substation control. There's also getting access and bringing the power to the substation. So there's a lot of elements to this that are also pretty big beyond that. So maybe that was too much of an answer. Sorry, Michaela.
No, thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
I next see a question in the Q&A from Clint, who asks, is the catchment for a station larger for intercity travel compared to commuter rail? One could argue that it should be, since the total trip time is long by car, which becomes less attractive. Anna, can you speak to that a little bit?
I think I'd like to ask Andreas to step in if he could.
Yeah, basically, you're right. I mean, we took that into consideration when we looked at the catchment areas along the entire corridor. So you could, I mean, there's always sort of a trade-off there in terms of what you can expect. The farther the farther away you are from the service, and the longer the trip is going to be to connect to it. And also keep in mind here as well that you've got, the northern tier Route 2 is not that far away from the the east-west corridor project that's also being undertaken. Those two lines are typically only 35 to 50 miles apart. And so you're going to have to, people who live in that middle section are going to be making decisions about if they're going to take the train, whether they're going to drive up to the Route 2 or they're going to go down towards the Springfield Palmer area. But as the project is refined, this is certainly something that we will want to take a closer look at.
I will add that we did our best to, in the schedules that we developed and modeled, to make possible connections with the north-south service, so that Brattleboro, a customer might very well get on the train and change at Greenfield.
Thank you. And thank you for that question. I next see a raised hand from Pam. Pam, you should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Great. Thanks, Michaela. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Pam Hardy, I live in Orange, Mass. Thank you for including Athol as a potential stop. I'm a big advocate for this area, and I appreciate our senators and representatives for advocating for that as well. And I also wanted to really advocate for the electrification. I really like the question that John, I think Garrett from Greenfield had asked about. Let's make sure we understand what these costs are, because it looks like it's a high cost. But then when I saw the cost per mile and the cost and the miles, or the vehicle miles traveled, being reduced, that was really exciting to see. And one thing, I'm not sure if this would be the scope of any future studies, but to understand if we were to keep it business as usual with diesel trains, what's the impact on, say, environmental justice communities along those tracks? So anyone who's, near to these trackways, more diesel trains are going to result in more diesel fumes. And so that would be another reason why I would love to see what are the externalized impacts that we could really focus on for advocating for the electrification. And thank you everyone for all of your thorough work, Michaela, Anna, Paul, and your team. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Anna and Paul.
Well, I think we see the evident environmental benefits of electrification, but the other alternatives, even with the diesel, show reductions in VMTs. We haven't done environmental analysis of the impact of the additional 5 round trips a day for the diesel trains, but that's something that would be measured and evaluated in a future phase of permitting. Paul, do you have anything you want to add? So.
No, I think that captures it, right? I think on the balance, the emissions from vehicles taken off the road, that's higher than generally than the emissions released from the trains that are be running. But I think you do raise some questions as this project becomes more detailed and more local. You just do want to make sure we're paying attention to that because idling or diesel emissions from trains have different impacts. So we just need to understand how that works as you move forward for sure.
Yeah, I might also add there's going to be fair variation in terms of types of emissions you're going to have depending on the equipment, the rolling stock that you're actually going to end up wanting to deploy.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I next see a couple of questions in the Q&A related to combinations of the alternatives. So Susan asks, have you considered any plans that combine some of these alternatives, such as electrified service that extends to Albany? Fred asks, could options 3 and 6 be combined, and would that save money while maximizing environmental impact? And also Clint asks about whether there was any consideration of a phased or hybrid project with a phase 1 from Boston to Greenfield to meet up with the Connecticut Valley trains, or the higher investment first on the Fitchburg to Greenfield segment to increase performance there, which might make the train more commuter-like to Boston from beyond Westminster or enable commuting to job centers like Fitchburg from the west. So Anna and Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about some of
Sure.
that next steps
Well,
relationship?
We did, set out to evaluate 6 alternatives, and we tried to select alternatives that would show the impacts of the characteristics of those alternatives. So I think people are already beginning to see there might be benefits from combining them, but we have not specifically engaged in those combinations beyond what you see. And I think that things like phasing are part of the next steps of, what are the next steps of implementation? Do you try to do just part of it in phases until you accomplish the whole thing? That's a subject for policymakers and communities to weigh in on as the project progresses. But in terms of specific combinations, all the last alternative had extremely low ridership that resulted from the extremely long trip time. So I tend to think it wouldn't be a good combination with alternative 3 because you'd get this really fast trip from North Adams to Fitchburg, and then people would wait around and you'd lose all the benefit of that speed, with that connection and with that longer trip into Boston and reverse. But I think in the end, some of these combinations may be what develop the greatest ridership as we begin to refine future approaches. Paul, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you covered it great. Thanks, Anna.
Okay. Did I miss one? I thought
Thank you.
Okay.
And thank you for all of those questions. I next see a raised hand from Stephen. Stephen, you should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Hello there. My name is Steve Ellis. I'm the town administrator in the town of Montague, which is just east of Greenfield. I have to tell you, as I start this, I'm an MTA baby. My grandfather was a Irish rail worker who worked in the tunnels in Boston, and my father had a full career for the MBTA. I love and believe in public transportation, and I love this project. Specifically, as someone who now is responsible for, what I'll say is the prosperity of a community. I love that it will provide equitable access to the opportunities that come with being able to access our primary job markets and economy, healthcare resources, cultural and other resources in the eastern part of the state. I also really feel it's an important move that is overdue because this part of the Commonwealth is experiencing significant population decline in some areas, as well as a graying of our population. And these are really important trends that improved access, ease of access to the rest of the Commonwealth may help to change, and potentially discourage outmigration, which I know is a major concern from an economic development and social perspective of the governor. I also really would encourage you to build the right system. And I'm taking the data that you've presented today at sort of face value. And, you know, it would appear that if financially viable, electrification would be the right short and long-term approach. And I say this from a ridership and environmental standpoint. And I believe that if you attend to a system, you create a system that attracts riders and is environmentally sound, you will find that you yield the greatest economic and quality of life value from the project over time. So I would ask you to focus in that direction to the extent it is feasible. I also really favor more stops. I think that we underrate the importance of being able to get from Shelburne Falls to Greenfield to Athol, and of course the communities that are immediately adjacent to them, as well as North Adams. So more stops is better, and the travel times really made that look like a very feasible option. And I would, you know, agree with your comments that the transfer in Fitchburg is something that really could undermine the success of the system, and we don't want to do that. So especially you know, in terms of the inclement weather that is so much a part of life in New England. Thank you very much from the community of Montague. I thank you for your work and really excited by the prospects of seeing this vision become a reality.
Thank you so much, Steve. We appreciate you being here, and we appreciate everyone for being here tonight to share your comments and questions and feedback with us. We appreciate it. I see a couple of comments in the Q&A related to some of the service alternatives presented. And Jim says, I like the full local service option. And Soren also comments similarly and says, thank you so much for considering all of these alternatives. The full local service is the one that I feel best addresses ridership and accessibility. Western Massachusetts has been without good transportation service for far too long. And with the full local service option, the majority of people can get to Boston directly. They could also have the option to get off at Fitchburg and transfer to the commuter rail if they want to, while everyone else could go straight on to Porter Square in Boston. Please strongly consider the full local service option. So thank you for your support of that alternative. We appreciate that. I next see a raised hand from Lisa. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Thank you. I want to thank you for the work you've done on this. Lisa Blackmer, North Adams City Council President and MMA board member. So I look at this in as two options. One, we always hear our kids leave town because there's no job options. But given the change in the virtual economy and remote work, there's many jobs, including state jobs, that have you can work from home. It's a remote option with meetings in Boston as needed, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly, whatever. So one, I think the option, the train schedule, and that's where I come from, I think the train schedule is going to really make or break it more than anything else, that and the cost to the rider, obviously. And if someone is commuting, they need to be able, even if it's only once or twice a month, they still have to be able to be in Boston for a 9 o'clock appointment or a 10 o'clock appointment or meeting. And then also be able to get back home in a reasonable hour. So that's one issue. And then also, as North Adams is kind of a tourist destination, we want to attract the tourists. So maybe there's a train on Friday night so that people can get back. Maybe they don't want to come back, then maybe they can't leave Boston until 6 o'clock or something. So I really think the schedule has to be looked at from both economic drivers in our case. I go into meetings in Boston and normal ride is 3 hours, but anytime or anywhere near commuting time started in 2010 as a 3.5 hour ride And now I have to leave my house at 5 if I want to make sure that I get there for a 10 o'clock meeting. So obviously this would be a much better alternative. It's also keeps me off the road and it's not active driving. Sitting on a train is less active, even if I'm working. So I hear a lot of that. Yeah, I would go if I could if it was a reasonable schedule, if I could get there by my meetings and not have to wait till 6 o'clock to come home. So it's both sides of it. And I think we need to make sure that we're looking at it from both the commuter economic development job option and the tourism economic development option. And thank you again for this.
We did try to project schedules and model schedules that served a variety of needs, including all the ones that you suggested. The Friday night service is something that the Commonwealth has tried, on the Cape and in the Berkshires for, seasonal weekend service. So, our purpose here is to take your feedback and to, incorporate what we can into next steps. So, those are excellent points.
Yes, thank you. I next see a raised hand from Fred. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Yeah, I just wanted to also advocate for the electrification option, and I know cost is an issue. So I'm wondering whether there might be more federal money available if we go through the electrification option, and that could lower the cost for taxpayers here.
It's conceivable that by the time this project is in implementation, there would be such incentives. There are substantial federal funds for intercity rail projects, and this project will be sometime in development. So by then there may be those types of environmental incentives but there is federal money now and in the foreseeable future for intercity rail. Andreas, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, there certainly is federal money available for these kinds of projects as part of the legislation that was passed a couple of years ago. But I mean, they're also going to look at, when they evaluate which projects to fund, I mean, they're also going to look at their economic efficacy as well. So that's one of the real challenges with electrification, because it does raise costs substantially.
Thank you. I next see a raised hand from Brianna. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
I am so excited about this project. I represent a nonprofit in the North Quabbin area, and we work with a lot of young adults, and definitely one of the biggest barriers that we hear from them is transportation. So very excited about this project. Would definitely be interested in exploring having the stop in Athol. I had a question, and I might have answered it with Rebecca Bielecki, but when you're looking at the long-term economic impact analysis, are you looking at existing and planned construction projects per capita when you're looking at where stops should go with the existing mapping that you have now, considering, she mentioned these two or three large residencies that are being built, and there's a couple business incubators that are being built, and if you're looking at that as part of when you're mapping out and deciding, the longer term economic development improvements for the area.
I think we mainly looked at the more populous towns that would likely support ridership. Paul or Andreas, do you have any further detail on that?
Well, I'll add that as part of the next phase of this, we are looking at benefit cost ratios for these alternatives. And as part of that, there's a pretty prescriptive way to measure things. And one of the benefits that's considered is kind of the increase in real estate value. So that does look at, a certain radius around the value of real estate around the existing station, and then uses a rate of what comparable stations have seen, what communities of comparable stations have seen as far as increase in real estate value. So that will be considered. So it is factored in there. We are not looking at new development just because it would be kind of speculative to do that. And I don't think it follows the guidance that they have for these BCAs.
I next see a raised hand from Simon. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Hello, yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I just want to support this project. I particularly support the third option with electrification. It's, in my opinion, clearly the best option for all communities in terms of economic savings. I think including other local stations is also great, but ridership is the most important part of that. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. And I also see a question in the Q&A from Taylor who echoes that and says, thank you so much for this informative discussion. Has there been any consideration of a full local service option that includes electrification? So yes, as Anna mentioned a little bit earlier, we developed these kind of 6 alternatives, and as part of phase 2 developed these 4 alternatives that we shared with you today. And there are certain elements that could be kind of added to the alternatives as they move forward. I next see a raised hand from Marcus. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
First of all, I'm more than grateful to be able to hear from this and actually see the numbers. Very frequent rider. I choose public transportation whenever I can. Driving is a real pain anywhere. I know, and I know the cost, and it's actually really great to see the numbers in person and right there to kind of understand where the project goes. I know from from a commuter standpoint, ones that like we know the cost, we know that there's a lot of factors, whether there's electrification or not. I mean, the thing with me as a commuter, and I think what I see the tiers, like projects that don't go well, at least from a commuter standpoint, you guys have way more experience than I do on it. Is reliability, the amount of trips, which I've heard numerous people in this, especially some of the communities I've lived in, as well as the model that you guys are pulling out, and the cost, which is right now is in planning phase, as Anna had mentioned, so it's not quite so much in that factor, but I'm sure it's going to be modeled off of something. Those are kind of the 3 factors. I think reliability, because you could have a line, but if it's not reliable, and I think when somebody else said, if you need to get a meeting for 9 a.m., if that train doesn't go in at any time, well, it's not really helping anybody. And I know that's a lot, way, and that's kind of maybe the next step, but that's kind of the questions I have in my mind. Serving Athol, I've lived in Orange. I live in Montague now. And that's definitely, that I think that's a good step. Electrification, I mean, depends on what equipment you have. That might be in sort of like, yes, it does cost, but to do a tier run. And also my other thing with that is, if you electrify that part, will it maybe like encourage MBTA to like electrify the rest of it so that it's not always on one half or the other, and maybe the MBTA will take initiative? Probably not, but it's kind of just that thought. So I mean, I'm very grateful to be here and to be able to listen to that. But those are just some of my things of, again, the reliability, the cost, both in general for the cost, for the cost of the project, because that's really gonna depend on how it affects us as the rider. And then, again, reliability, is there right now, even the Vermonters, 1 train, and even the Valley Flyer, 2 trains versus, the 5 trains a day. I really like that. Obviously more is better, but you got to start somewhere. But thank you so much. And it was great to hear it. And it's more of a comment, but those are kind of the questions that I do have, for the next steps.
So we did model the projected schedule to try to determine the infrastructure that would provide a reliable service. So where we add double tracking and interlockings, that's with the goal of improving the reliability and being able to make that schedule. But you are correct that when you get to an operations perspective, you need the infrastructure, but you also need who's ever running the trains to make them reliable as well in the manner that they operate them. So you're right, that is one of the key features that you have to manage forever. It's not just a one and done when you build it.
I next see a raised hand from Tom Bernard. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Great, thank you so much. I just, Michaela, Anna, Paul, Andres, this is fantastic. And what we saw tonight was the maturity of the model that you started presenting and introducing back in January. And what came through very clearly was that A, you heard us, and B, what we were advocating for turns out to be unsurprisingly the best path forward. The shortest time is going to have the greatest impact. And Paul, I really appreciate that you're being very generous in your ridership models, because it really will. I really believe that that's where we'll end up. And as others have said, this is economic development. This is equity. I would echo what Pam and John and Steve and others have said about the environmental benefits of electrification, if we can get there. And I would just say, as we wrap up, and I should say I'm another voice from North Adams, that this is a once in a lifetime investment. This is generational. This is game changing. And if we look back to history, you could say all of those things about the Hoosick Tunnel. So let's use history as our model in that way and go forward boldly. Thanks so much.
Thank you for being here. We appreciate you sharing those comments, and we appreciate everyone being here with us to share your comments and questions and feedback with us. I know we're a little over 7:30 and we have a few, we still have comments and questions in the Q&A as well. I believe we'll have time for maybe a couple more, and then we will transition to next steps for the study process. So I see a couple of comments in the Q&A from Dawn and Elaine, who kind of talk about connection to other transit services outside of the northern tier. So Dawn asks about how easily people will be able to move around Boston by public transportation from this train. Elaine talks about Elaine says that for areas that will not have access to rail, is it possible to link small towns to bus or van service to a major connection? And also Emily as well in the chat asks about ridership potential from UMass, and asks about a connection from the PVTA or FRTA to the Greenfield station. So those RTAs are on our working group. So they are involved so we're coordinating with them. But Anna and Paul, do you want to talk a little bit about some of those other connections?
Yeah, I'll start, and maybe Paul can take over. When the train gets to Porter Square in Cambridge, and it directly connects with MBTA commuter rail and with the Red Line, as well as local bus service in Cambridge. So it's a rich source of connections, but it also lands in a pretty rich area for attractions. And when you get to North Station, there's all the other commuter rail lines, the Orange Line, the Green Line, that can bring you throughout the city of Boston and connect you to South Station or Back Bay as well, if you want to continue on another train trip, to another destination to the south. So at the end of the line, you have very rich connections. I think in regard to local van services, I think we will all agree that in order to make a train service work, communities probably are going to have to support their car-free residents and others who don't have availability to cars to get to the train station, without a car. So I think we, in order for this type of train service to work, there will need to be support from communities and various stakeholders to provide the opportunity for people to use it. Paul, so.
And what I would add is that, just like there's connections at North Station and Porter Square, most of the station locations that we were looking at are either at or near existing kind of hubs for the regional transit authority. So there is a regional transit authority active, along the whole corridor. There are different ones as you go, but especially the Greenfield, the Fitchburg, and I think even the Athol station especially are either existing hubs of the local transit networks or actually RTA facilities. And this is the kind of thing, this is the kind of destination, a new train station, a new intermodal connection that a lot of these RTAs, would be happy to, plan service around and make those connections. So I think that's a big part of it. I think you do have networks of other modes of access, right? Taxi services, pick up and drop off, all those different types of things. Those would all be facilitated as the service as a whole corridor, focuses down on how do you make each station work and integrate it into the community.
And that would probably apply to UMass and PVTA as well,
Yeah, I would just add just a geography thing. PVTA doesn't run up into Greenfield. It's a different service provider, but we can work together to find options for that kind of thing.
Thank you. I next see a raised hand from Susan. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Yes, hi. I am so excited to learn about this and very appreciative of all the work that you've done so far on it. I didn't realize it had come along this far until I came to this presentation. And I'm also super excited that you've got an electrification option, because I do think that there are so many impacts of that, and climate and equity and all sorts of things that are associated with that. So I hope that the electrification will happen. As a Northern Berkshire resident for almost 30 years, with connections in Boston and New York City, I have really found that the Northern Berkshires are particularly isolated and hard to reach for people who don't have cars. And so I think this is a really important development to connect us to Boston and that area. But part of what really would make this effective is maintaining that very fast, 3-hour or less time course of the travel. And I'm afraid, I have to oppose some of the other comments about wanting a lot of local stops, because I'm afraid that will really undermine the advantages of this train service with that speed. And if that is something that's really important to people, I think maybe they can work out, as other callers have said, local transportation to get them to the kind of more regional stations. But if it turns out that really the majority of people want all those local stops, I'm wondering if there's a possibility for setting up the schedule so that some trains are locals and some go through and don't make a lot of stops. And I don't know if that means has anything to do with the design of the tracks, to make sure that you can have kind of maybe, 1 or 2 a day faster trains, and then maybe 1 or 2 local trains.
So I may turn to Andreas for part of this, but you can have combinations like that. In terms of the local stops on this service and the alternatives we've developed, the local stops developed higher ridership. So we hadn't reached the point where we had so many stops that ridership was going down. But on the other hand, if you're taking the train from North Adams, conceivably you get to a point where the next stop makes it too long for you to want to travel. Andreas, anything you want to talk to about here?
Yeah, I think one thing to be cautious about is if given the limited frequencies we're looking at here with 5 trains, I think generally the practice in most parts of the world is to try to put the same service out across all the trains. It really, if you want to do limited stop versus local stop operations, then you're looking at a higher trade density than what we're looking at right now.
And I think as this Commonwealth moves forward in this process, the combination of accessibility and mobility is important, and that optimizing ridership is important, but also, providing that connectivity to the farthest west of the state, is another important factor that all will have to be balanced as the decision move forward on, how to build move to the next steps.
Thank you. I next see a couple of comments in the Q&A related to economic development. And one from Ben Lamb says, I would echo Andy's remarks on the added long-term assessment. This is a generational economic opportunity. Thank you for such a thorough and thoughtful analysis. It is exciting to see a realistic opportunity to bolster the economy of the entire Commonwealth through such a high impact project. So thank you, Ben, for sharing that. We appreciate that. And I also see a similar comment from Senator Comerford, who says, I agree with Andy about the benefit of seeing a longer term community-based economic projections for the northern tier communities. We also need to have a climate impact analysis for the electric service. Both would help us have a fuller picture of return on investment. So thank you, Senator, for raising those as well. I next see a raised hand from Chris. You should have a notification on your screen to unmute.
Hi. Hey, thanks very much for this presentation. Hello, Andreas. My question, and I put it in the chat as well, but I don't understand why the ridership estimate for the electrification option is so much higher, almost double, it looks like, compared to the higher investment option. As far as I can see, the service is the same.
And the main, there's an increase in the trip time there's a reduction in trip time that allowed us to add station stops to that alternative. And the additional station stops generated the additional ridership. So the trip time ends up being almost the same, but we're stopping in these additional communities, which generates that benefit. If anyone else, my colleagues, want to add, they certainly may. So.
I think one of the big things included there is I believe we have Ayer as a station stop there. So that's that adds a lot of ridership to the alternative 3.
Great, thank you. And thank you all for your comments and questions. I know we have a couple of additional questions in the Q&A, and our team will be able to respond to everyone who's shared their comments and questions after tonight's meeting. But as of right now, I'd like to transition to some of the next steps for this study process. So we can move to our next steps section. And so again, thank you all for your input based on the feedback we've received tonight and at the working group meeting held last week. We will continue to make refinements and then develop recommended next steps for this effort. And so in terms of schedule, we anticipate holding the next working group meeting and public meetings this winter to share information and receive feedback on task 7. So moving to our next slide. With that, I would like to again thank you all for being here tonight and for your participation both tonight and throughout this process. I encourage you to visit the study website to share any additional comments and questions using the Q&A or using the comment form rather, or to sign up to receive study updates if you haven't already. The materials from this meeting, including the video recording, will be made available on the study website. And so with that, that concludes tonight's meeting. Thank you all for joining us. We look forward to reconvening this winter. Thank you all.